Hey y'all. So we are on chapter 6. Very exciting. It's part of part 2, The Roots of Black Radicalism. Chapter 6 is the historical archaeology of the Black radical tradition. This low-key is a long chapter, but it's really good. And instead of like recording my videos and like all of the whole chapter and then posting it, I'm just gonna start posting as I finish the videos, so we don't have to wait too long about seeing them. And then another thing, oh, I think I already said this, I'm not entirely sure. What I started putting, where's my notebook? Oh, so I had this app and I can download my PDF. I can like scan my PDF notes. I'm a little bit technologically illiterate, okay? And I think I already said this, but I just want to make sure. And so I can share them. So I'm just scanning. Wait a second. Oh. Oh. Okay, yeah. So that'll be the rest of what I'll figure out for today after this chapter. This is a really exciting chapter for me, but it gets more, it's like anticipation. It's like obviously it's building up, but it's really good. Okay, so anyways, let's start. The historical archaeology of the Black radical tradition. The role of Black labor in the expansion and preservation of capitalism was not, however, the whole of it. The disposition of Black peoples in the New World had still another consequence. Wait, okay, would you guys like discussion videos? Because that's what I was planning on doing, but I don't know if like anyone would like to listen. So like my plan was to like read the chapters, right? And then go back and do discussions and be like, okay, this is what they said. This is what I took in. Let me know if you got like received the same information and like on top of like the reading, you know what I mean? Because sometimes like even for myself, when I first read this book for my class, I was like, what did he say? So like having that discussion and breaking it down made it more digestible. Why did I do that? Oh, well, digestible. That's why I did that. But anyways, the role of Black labor in the expansion and preservation of capitalism was not, however, the whole of it. The disposition of Black peoples in the New World had still another consequence, a consequence entirely unintended and unanticipated by the tradesmen and ideologists of slavery. Still, the naivety of the Europeans was substantially of their own making. Slavery as a system and a way of life was hardly a I just looked this up. Shh, don't say nothing. We're gonna do it again. Let me look it up again. Prospicious. Let's find it. Right, no.
Propitious.
I was right. Propitious, meaning giving or indicating a good chance of success. Was hardly a propitious for setting for much else. The structured ignorance that was an almost inevitable concomitant of the use of enslaved labor weighed heavily on European thought in general, irrespective of social ideology. And like think about it with like you know how earlier there was like Cedric Robinson mentioned how like the people of the North, they still thought of Black people as like not human, but and in the same as like the South, but they still try to, it's like the white liberal versus the white conservative type of thing where like they'll still think poorly about Black people and have unchecked racial ideology, racist thinking and stuff like that, like that's kind of what that's okay. Marx had once assigned slavery to that stage of capitalism's development that he characterized as primitive accumulation. He had not meant the term in any invidious sense, but had intended simply to, in part, emphasize that the dominant capitalist mode of production bore little responsibility for the production and reproduction of the human materials it commanded in this aspect. Marx had meant by primitive accumulation that the países de Indias had been the people of war. Right? Let's be sure. Países de Indias. Parts of war. Piece of India. What? What's that word? Translation. Stop. Indian pieces. I'm wrong. So yeah, Indian pieces had been produced. Okay, let me say that again. Marx had meant by primitive accumulation that the piezas de Indias had been produced materially and intellectually by the societies from which they were taken, and not by those for which they were exploited. These cargoes of slave ships were real human beings, notwithstanding their manner of transport. The bills of ladino, the captain's logs, the trade account books that designated them otherwise. However, Marx had not realized fully that the cargoes of laborers, I don't know why that sounds weird, also contained African cultures, critical mixes and admixtures of language and thought, of cosmology and metaphysics, of habits, beliefs, and morality. These were the actual terms of their humanity. These cargoes, then, did not consist of intellectual isolates or decultured blacks, men, women, and children separated from their previous universe. African labor brought the past with it, a past that had produced it and settled on it the first elements of consciousness and comprehension. Importante. Put a little note. This was the embryo of the demon that would be visited in the whole enterprise of primitive accumulation. It would be through the historical and social consciousness of these Africans that the trade in slaves and the system of slave labor was infected with this contradiction. I love the way he puts words together. Much later, in the midst of the struggle against Portuguese imperialism in Guinea-Bissau? I think that's how it's pronounced. Guinea-Bissau? Let's look it up. Guinea. Country in West Africa per pronunciation. Oh, not slow.
Guinea-Bissau.
Look at me go. Look at me go. Okay. Guinea-Bissau. In this century. Why am I saying that wrong? Every time I see his name, I say it wrong. Amilcar Cabral. Amilcar Cabral. Cabral. Look at him go. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Pronunciation.
Amilcar Cabral.
Amilcar
Cabral. Amilcar Cabral.
Because the I, it throws me off. The I throws me off.
Amilcar Cabral.
Oh, okay. Amilcar Cabral. Thank you.
Amilcar Cabral. Amilcar Cabral.
Amilcar Cabral. Oh, dang.
Amilcar Cabral.
Cabral. Amilcar Cabral. Amilcar Cabral.
Amilcar Cabral. Amilcar Cabral.
What's wrong with me?
Amilcar Cabral.
Okay. Thanks for bearing with me. Would reveal the nature of this contradiction. Imperialist domination. Oh, this is his quote. Imperialist domination, by denying the historical development of the dominated people, necessarily also denies their cultural development. It is understood why imperialist domination, like all other foreign domination for its own security, requires cultural oppression and the attempt at direct or indirect liquidation of the essential elements of the culture of the dominated people. It is generally within the culture that we find the seed of opposition. And think about Black culture. Give me a time to have a discussion about this topic specifically in terms of Black culture and what it does. Give me girl. But anyways, let me make a note of that. Where are my sticky notes at? Not my sticky notes. These. Because I'll probably write about this. I mean, like, not necessarily, like, write, like, some, what do you call it? I'm, like, you know, when you get, like, when things are just interesting to you, like, this is interesting to me. Like, the ways in which, like, the cultural, like, oppression, repression, and then it's like, why? Like, think about, oh my God, think about Black history. Think about Black music. Think about Black, anything, like, Black, by Black people, and how that's wiped out, erased, removed, like, deliberately. Like, think about how when we're taught about Black history, we're taught about MLK, Rosa Parks. That's it, in terms of, like, getting our rights. When they, like, leave out a lot of information, like Rosa Parks, she was a I was about to say something else. She was an organizer. She had a long history of organizing. I have a book. Sorry for this book, At the Dark End of the Street, Black Women, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this word on YouTube, and Resistance, a new history of the civil rights movement from Rosa Parks to the rise of Black power. Listen about how she described Rosa Parks. Listen, it's so good. A few days later, a telephone rang at the NAACP branch office in Montgomery, Alabama. E.D. Nixon, the local president, promised to send his best investigator to Abbeville. That investigator would launch a movement that would ultimately change the world. Her name was Rosa Parks. In later years, historians would paint Rosa Parks as a sweet and rescient, like, old woman whose tired feet caused her to defy Jim Crow on Montgomery City buses. Her solitary, and that's the thing, solitary, do you hear that? Rather than looking at her actions as a continuation of the Black radical tradition, they put Black history in these little confined descriptors and whatever, and it's like, no, Black history is continuous and ever evolving. We bring that past with us. Shit. A solitary and spontaneous act, the story goes, sparked the 1955 bus boycott and gave birth to the civil rights movement. But Rosa Parks was a militant race woman, a sharp detective, and an anti-rape activist. Sorry, YouTube, please don't take this down. It's educational. Please. Activist long before she became a patron saint of the bus boycott. After meeting with Recy Taylor, Rosa Parks helped form the Committee for Equal Justice. With support from local people, she helped organize what the Chicago Defender called the strongest campaign for equal justice to be seen in a decade. 11 years later, this group of homegrown leaders would become better known as the Montgomery Improvement Association. The 1955 Montgomery bus boycott, often heralded as the opening scene of the civil rights movement, was in many ways the last act of a decades-long struggle to protect Black women, like Taylor, from sexualized violence and rape. Girl. Anyways, where were we at? Sorry. See, that's my problem. I just start going off on tangents because when you see how things connect, it's like, oh, Black history. And how the seeds of oppression, when you actually know your history, and this is like for myself too, every single day I'm learning something new, and I'm over here like, wow, right? But when you know your Black history, that is a seed of resistance. Where are my notes? Where are my other notes? Nope. Period. We'll come back to the notes another time. You saw me get excited though. I was ready to go up on my tangent. The transport of African labor to the mines and plantations of the Caribbean and subsequently what would be known as the Americas meant also the transfer of African ontological, that's like ways of being and knowledge of whatever, right, and cosmological systems. African presumptions of the organization and significance of social structure. African codes embodying historical consciousness and social experience. Did I say that right? Embodying historical consciousness and social experience. And African ideological and behavioral constructions for the resolution of the inevitable conflicts between the actual and the normative. Michael Creighton grasps this when he recounts that Their African peasant roots clearly predisposed all slaves to regard plantation agriculture as being as being as unnatural as the institution which sustained it. From the earliest days, runaway slaves settled around provision grounds called polinks in the English colonies, planques in the Spanish, worked in a manner owing something to African farming, something to the Kanunko agriculture of the Amerindians, the indigenous people here. I believe that's what they're referencing. More deeply, the slaves retained and developed concepts of family and kin. I have a really good article for that. I'm going to put that on Discord. I put another article on Discord. Girl, we're building as we're going. We're just building, okay? Where's my... Oh, you're on my iPad. That's why I can't access my Discord. I was looking for my iPad so I can be like, let me show you my Discord. Guys, I'm recording on my iPad. Let's just keep going. Let me stop interrupting so that I can post this video and then we can keep going. Okay, wait. Okay. Oh. More deeply, the slaves retained and developed concepts of family and kin quite beyond the comprehension and control of the master class. And think about that. Like the way that, you know how we say aunt and uncle, or like that's my cousin, but that's not actually your cousin. Or that's not my, like I have a lot of aunts and uncles, but they ain't actually my aunts and uncles. Right? Like how that still plays out to this day. Or, okay, yeah, so you get it. Because it's not Black people, like the nuclear family. Oh, and that's what this article gets into. Like the nuclear family, if we really want to get into it, is just like the mom and their children through an African lens. But then when we look at, okay, I need to actually review the article, but that's kind of like a little bit, that's only a tad of what they say, but there's a lot more information that I'm skipping in my brain. But anyways, let me keep reading. I'm sorry. I apologize. I got a little too excited and I have no ADHD medicine. The concept of land tenure that was in contradiction to that of the dominant European culture. They wanted to live in family units, to have ready access to land of their own and be free to develop their own culture, particularly their own synchronized religion. These were the basic aspirations, which varied according to the different conditions in each of the colonies affected by rebellion. And I like that paragraph specifically. Like my grandparents, they were able to, first of all, they moved to a sundown town, like right outside of DC, because like this area, there's a big Black population. Oh, that reminded me I need to do something. But there was like a lot of Black kids being left behind, but they bought their house and they helped with integration and like the schooling thing. But then they started growing their own food, my grandparents. And when I read this book, it kind of made me realize like what my grandparents did, and I was like, and like how a lot of our grandparents or parents, like how they formed their own trek of resistance, and it like you could see those like that continuation of that Black radical tradition. It's like amazing to me. But anyways, see that, stop, Alana, stop. I need to stop going off on my tangents. These were the terms upon which the response of the enslaved to the slave system would be grounded. And then think about that now. And like, nope, see, you see that? You see my brain working? But I will come back to this. I will come back to this point. I'm going to put a little star for our discussion, if that's what y'all are interested in, because I actually want to get into like that part right there, because it's really interesting. We'll come back when I find it. I'm looking for another sticky note. Anyways, part two. I mean, not part two, the next part. History and the mere slave. But even those unfamiliar with the histories of enslaved Africans, it should come as no surprise that these African peoples responded to slavery in several ways. In the North American slave experience, particularly with respect to the 19th century, the attempts to portray the slave personality type To identify a plantation type, a notion already firmly in place by the time the system produced its most celebrated post hoc apologist, Ulrich Bonnell Phillips. Okay, Ulrich Bonnell Phillips had as their result a veritable stock company of characters. John Blassingame, a recent contributor to a literature that has ranged from the observations of 18th and 19th century travelers and sometimes equally oh, I don't know that word. Let's look it up. Where'd it go? Oh, there it is.
Peripatetic.
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 Peripatetic, meaning traveling from place to place, in particular, working or based in various places for relatively short periods. Oh, like chattel slavery? Relating to or given to walking, moving, or traveling from place to place. Wandering. Okay, never mind. Peripatetic, well, okay. Travelers and sometimes equally peripatetic abolitionists. Oh, I'm wrong. I'm wrong about, traveling abolitionists, wandering abolitionists. Per plantation records and memorabilia, slave testimony, contemporary novels, and conventional historiography, which made a good effort to organize its description of the slave laborers. He enumerated the masks. You know that poem? We wear the mask. We wear the mask that grins and smiles, that hides our tears. And what is it? We wear the mask that grins and smiles. Sorry. Okay, we're just going off on a tangent now, so it's okay. We Wear the Mask by Paul Laurence Dunbar and Maya Angelou. I love both of them. Okay, it's not going to be that much longer. We wear the mask that grins and lies, it hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile with torn and bleeding hearts. We smile and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be overwise in counting our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. We smile, but, O great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh, that the clay is vile beneath our feet and long the mile, but let the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask. Girl! Underline. The posturings and the more naked affects the African workers and their descendants displayed. You know what I mean? It's so cool. It's so cool when you see the way that history and then Black literature, okay, the nerd in me is living. But let me give you another book recommendation. I got this from thriftbooks.com, so it's not expensive. The Norton Anthology of African American Literature. This is the second edition. I'm not going to open the book, so we're not going to go off on another tangent, I promise, but it's kind of thick, but it has so much information. I literally am living in that book. Okay, the masks. He enumerated the masks, the posturings, and the more naked affects the African workers and their descendants displayed. The vain house servant, frequently wearing the airs and the clothes of those who owned the house and made similar claims to the slave workers. The Sambo, the docile, the submissive, terrorized individual, broken by the omniscience. Hold up, omniscience. Omniscience. Wait. Oops.
Omniscience.
Omniscience, a state of knowing everything. Broken by the omniscience of psychological and physical pain. Oh, knowing the physical, the psychological, like the state of knowing everything, the state of knowing everything of these like psychological and physical pain. Often, such men and women grew increasingly indifferent to the specter of punishment and suffering, both that of others and themselves. Separation, the trauma of realization that one had neither the right nor the power to resist what must have seemed so often to be the arbitrary or cruel removal from those who really mattered, too registered its own particular marks. Angry, despondent, and overcome by grief, the slaves frequently never recovered from the shock of separation. Many became morose and indifferent to their work. Others went insane, talked to themselves, and had hallucinations about their loved ones. A few slaves developed suicidal tendencies. And did you know that some suicide prevention tactics that we have, like to this day, have roots in slavery? And like that, when I learned about that, girl, I'm a psychology major and I wanted to become a psychologist. And then when I learned about that, I was like, oh. And that doesn't mean I don't want to become a psychologist anymore. It just means that I want to work towards the mental and physical liberation of like everybody and not continue to perpetuate the mental enslavement, the mental policing. You know what I mean? I have a couple books on that recommendation, but we'll come back because you and I both know I'll go off on another tangent. But like, think about that. And then also, it was seen as a mental illness to run away from slavery. It was called drapetomania, and they would have like either their toes cut off, they would be like whipped, like stuff like that. And it's like, wow, like learning this stuff is like, wow. Anyways, others, still further along the path of distraction, came to accept the assertion of the sanctity of whiteness and the shame of blackness. But Blassingame was convinced by contemporary testimony and observation that for the majority of the enslaved, the field hands, the oppressiveness of the system compelled social rather than psychological fetters. For the most part, the slave laborers were sullenly obedient and hostilely submissive. According to Blasingame, he contains having a variety of relationships besides that with his master, the slave was able to preserve his self-esteem in spite of the cruel punishment he received. The docility of the slave was a sham, a mask, to hide his true feelings and personality traits. Blasingame would conclude, too casually we will suggest that the same range of personality types existed in the quarters of the mansion. Leslie Howard Owens, another black historian, exhibited even fewer reservations than Blasingame on the naturalness of rebelliousness within the domination of the American slave structure, where Blasingame hedges, apparently conceding to the dichotomies frequently encountered in the literature of American slavery between house slave and field slave, between the cruel master redundancy and the benevolent master contradiction. Owens asserts simply that, and this is the quotation, that slaves were discontented with their bondage is overwhelmingly documented by manuscript and narrative materials. For Owens, then, rebelliousness was situational, its context the slave system. Tracing what he termed the logic of resistance, Owens noted among the slave workers the multiplicity of their responses to domination, the broken and misplaced tools, the burning of crops, the work slowdowns, the assistance and protection afforded to runaways, stealing, flight, the forming of short-lived maroon communities, even self-mutilation and suicide. Ultimately, of course, there was an insurrection. The existential constancy of the slave system, with its inevitable demonstration and exercises of the collective and individual wills of the master class, had as their result the persistence of attacks upon the system. Suppression of minor and serious slave disturbances by the slave regime did not erase slave disobedience for long, Owens remarks. The slave system generated its own maelstrom. Maelstrom. Let's look that one up too. Doo-doo-doo-doo. Let's hurry up, Alana. Sorry. No more. Wait.
Maelstrom.
Maelstrom, a powerful whirlpool, a situation or state of confused movement or violent turmoil, turbulence. Aside from this dialectic, it seems nothing else was fixed or static. Certainly not the personalities in which the enslaved publicly addressed themselves. Some recognition of the slave's shifting rather than static identity is important in understanding why sometimes very little separated his minor acts of disobedience from his serious act of threats of rebellion. Most disturbing of all, perhaps, to the master class was the monstrous deception lying behind the black docility it so desperately desired. Think about that. That there was some docility among slaves need not be denied, but it was not the norm. Masters and authorities repeatedly linked seemingly docile slaves. I have this one. What's it? There's a story from this one by Charles Chestnut. It's so good. Okay, Harlem Renaissance. Charles. Okay, I'll come back. What's it called? Something Grandison. Something Grandison. I'll find it, but it talks about the docility, and then Grandison flips the script and was like, haha, and took his family to freedom, and like they thought he was like such a like loyal slave. It was so cool. Something Grandison. It's so good. Okay. Masters and authorities repeatedly linked seemingly docile slaves to acts of resistance. The psychological dividends for those who commanded the system were drawn from the necessary vigilance, fear, and paranoia, moral degradation, and finally, according to some historians, a failure of will. Still, it is useful to pause here for a moment to consider what revisionists such as Blassingame and Owens and a score of other historians, black and non-black, in the past 20 years or so have taken to be the issue. Clearly, they have addressed themselves to one overriding claim, that the enslaved in time came to accept the terms of slavery, the practice of submission. So went the conventional wisdom embodied in the American disciplines of history, sociology, and psychology became for the slaves the habits of inferiority. For their descendants, the psychological marks of oppression, the culture of the dominated, the perverted, twisted familial structures of matriarchy and matricolality. It's a social structure where married couples lives near their wife's family. Residents, especially of newly married couples with the wife's family, resides. Okay. Oh, they go with the mom's family instead of the dad's. That's what that's saying. Notice, if you will, how often the violation of the slave is referred to. Often the violation of the slave is referred to emasculation or castration, etc. Oh. The American revisionists, in the main, have sought to refute the tradition deposited in their national record and consciousness that blacks became slaves, finally. They have chosen to come to terms with the reiterated public fantasy that the subsequent generations of native sons were fatally marked culturally and emotionally by the accommodation effected by their forebears. The American revisionists have attempted to supply academic substance to the insistence of their own generations that the material, political, and social circumstances of blacks in the 20th century are not the consequences of private or collective psychopathologies among blacks. They have transformed this African people into human beings capable of judgment, injury, accommodation, and heroism. In short, a people possessing, as blasphemy put it, the same range. To this point, their project had been successfully executed. The scholarship, the narratives, the documents speak for themselves in a stridently eloquent way. Still, this political triumph is but a partial one. For the defense of the slaves addresses of the for the defense of the slaves addresses its antagonists in their own terms. Expectedly, in a post-slave society where the historical victory of the enslaved stratum was incomplete, the question of the humanity of the enslaved people would linger. It follows, have to be spoken to. Now we know what the master class certainly knew, but for a long but sorry, dang. But for so long publicly denied only to be confronted with the truth in its nightmares, its sexual fantasies, its rotting social consciousness. The enslaved were human beings. They never wanted to admit that. That's what they're saying. They never wanted to admit that they were human beings. So they made up all these BS. But the more authentic question was not whether the slaves and the ex-slaves and their descendants were human. It was rather just what sort of people they were and could be. Slavery altered the conditions of their being, but it could not negate their being. Long before the troubled American Republic of the 19th century even became a possibility, a part of the answer began its unfolding. As we shall soon see, its historical imprint is still clear. Okay. And then the next part is red, whites, and blacks. Okay. Pause.